What you got in store, 1984? A little bit of mystery, a little bit more. Stocks climb high, new gadgets score, as Japan's economic bubble starts to roar. 1984, a year where ambition and absurdity collided at full Shinkansen-level speeds. The stock market breaking records, a revolution in fast fashion, a revolution in sushi, an unknown criminal holding an entire nation in suspense, the debut of a spiky-haired monkey boy, and a certain love made of plastic that took more than 30 years to unfold its true potential. All that and much more awaits us in year number 5 of the most weirdly nostalgic decade ever. But before we hit the play button in history, allow me to ask you a question. Don't you just hate ads? Hey, so do I. Imagine if there was a way to enjoy all my content completely ad-free and boost your support for this channel at the same time. Boy, wouldn't that be fantastic. Well, would you look at that? Patreon.com/AnikiHistory has got you covered. Starting at just $1 a month, you can now get every new video, including most of my existing catalog of content, ad-free. Plus, extra perks if you want them. And don't you worry, our beloved Japanese 1980s commercials, those are the only types of ads that remain completely safe. Prefer to stick with YouTube? That's cool with me. Just, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't already. Alright, that's enough self-promotion for one day. So let's fire up the time machine, cue the city pop, and head straight into 1984. Ikimashou. Let's do this. Money, money, money. Must be funny. Especially if you were a Japanese stock investor in 1984. The year kicked off strong when on January 9th, the Nikkei stock average broke the 10,000 yen mark for the first time ever. What does that mean exactly? In short, things were booming, Japan was getting richer by the day, and optimism was sky high. But this historic 5-digit milestone was just the beginning, because by the end of the decade, the Nikkei would soar to nearly 39,000 yen, a 6-fold jump from the beginning of the 1980s. Life was good. I'm sure this won't all come crashing down soon and ruin the party. I mean, that would be absurd, right? Right? Then on January 26th, controversial tabloid Shukan Bunshun dropped one of the biggest scandals of the decade on Japan. The name on everyone's lips, Miura Kazuyoshi. Miura was a businessman who, along with his wife, had been shot in downtown Los Angeles back in 1981. He survived, but tragically his wife did not, and for the next 2 or 3 years, Miura became Japan's favorite tragic husband, a symbol of loss and resilience. But that image came crashing down when Shukan Bunshun published its explosive 1984 article titled Bullet of Suspicion. Great freaking title, attached to an article that did indeed hit like a bullet. The paper accused Miura of orchestrating his wife's murder to collect a hefty insurance payout, and even claimed he'd pulled pretty much that exact same stunt with a lover in LA back in 1979. The story was just as sensational and scandalous as you would probably expect from a tabloid, and it completely took over the country. Overnight, Miura went from tragic victim to national villain. The media tore through every corner of his life, his history of juvenile delinquency, his private affairs, everything. Then an actress, a former lover, came forward, confirming the Los Angeles scandal as it was dubbed. Miura was then arrested in 1985, sentenced to life by the Tokyo District Court, then acquitted by the Tokyo High Court for lack of evidence. Guilty or not, hated or not, he was a free man, and remained so for the following 2+ decades, until 2008, when he made one fateful mistake. He traveled to Saipan, and because his case was still under investigation in US territory, he was swiftly extradited to LA, where he then took his own life in jail in October of that same year. From beloved husband to hated criminal, all from one single article. Behold the power of the tabloid press. On February 13th, Japan lost one of its greatest adventurers, Uemura Naomi. This man wasn't just a skilled climber or explorer, this man was a legend. Uemura was the first person to reach the North Pole solo, the first to raft the Amazon River solo, and before even hitting 30, he climbed Kilimanjaro, Aconcagua, Mont Blanc, and the Matterhorn again solo. And he also participated in the first Japanese expedition to summit Mount Everest. In short, this was a guy whose solo achievements made nearly every other explorer look like a tourist. So, when Uemura set out to solo climb Mount McKinley in early 1984, no one doubted he'd make it. And he did, reaching the summit on February 12th, his birthday no less. The next day, he radioed in his success, saying he was descending and expected to reach base camp within 2 days. But that was the last anyone ever heard of him. Searchers later found traces of his descent, his gear, his diary, but never his body. Uemura was posthumously awarded the People's Honor Award, and a new accolade was created in his name, the Naomi Uemura Prize, celebrating Japan's boldest explorers. A true legend, fearless, solitary, and gone far too soon, but never forgotten. Never forgotten, and also never solved, was a string of bizarre events that began on March 18th when the president of Japan's beloved candy maker Glico was kidnapped from his home in Hyogo Prefecture. While taking a bath, no less. I mean, that's just cruel. Thankfully though, he managed to escape unharmed a few days later, but his kidnapping was only the start of what would become one of the strangest unsolved criminal cases in 1980s Japan. Over the following months, a series of letters signed by someone calling themselves the Monster with 21 Faces began arriving at Glico and several other major companies. The letters demanded huge ransoms that were never collected, and openly mocked the police for failing to catch the culprit despite leaving several hints. Then, starting in May, the monster claimed to have poisoned Glico products and placed them on random store shelves, which triggered national panic, a massive boycott, and non-stop media coverage. By September, the threats had spread to candy giant Morinaga, and in October, investigators discovered packages of poisoned Morinaga sweets sitting on store shelves, complete with a note that read, "This has poison in it. If you eat it, you will die." All signed, of course, by the Monster with 21 Faces. The letters abruptly stopped in August of 1985, with a final message announcing the end of the campaign. But in the 40-plus years since, no one has ever been arrested in connection to the case, all despite detailed police sketches, a security tape showing a suspect placing the Morinaga candy in a family mart, and several near misses. The Monster with 21 Faces and the Glico-Morinaga case remain one of Japan's great unsolved mysteries, and one of its creepiest. I mean, is life really worth living if you can't even buy Pocky Sticks anymore? Now before we finally move on to happier times after months of tragedy, drama, and mystery, April 6th marked the passing of Hasegawa Kazuo at age 76, and with it, the end of an era in Japanese cinema. Born into a Kyoto family of sake brewers, Hasegawa began his career in kabuki theater, later transitioning into film and appearing in over 300 movies between 1927 and 1963. He was among the rare actors who thrived in both pre-war and post-war Japan, starring in many classics such as A Story from Chikamatsu, An Actor's Revenge, and Gate of Hell, just to name a few. By the 1980s, Japan's film industry had of course evolved drastically, but Hasegawa, as one of the 6 great period drama stars, remained a bridge between the old and the new. So his death kind of felt like losing a living piece of film history. And in recognition of his immense contributions to Japanese cinema, he became the first actor ever to receive the country's People's Honor Award posthumously. A fitting tribute to one of Japan's most formative movie stars. Rest in peace.
コマーシャルタイムです。
懐かしい顔がいたヘンリー・カー、東京オリンピック陸上 200m の勝者。青春の思い出は汗で勝ち取った勝利の月桂冠。そして 20年前に触れた日本の心。
I love Japan.
栄光は永遠に。勝者の印。決定感。
April 25th, a day that almost deserves its own holiday. That day, Maria Takeuchi released her sixth studio album, Variety, which debuted at number 1 and sold over 300,000 copies. But Variety wasn't just a commercial success, it also marked Takeuchi's comeback after a 3-year hiatus and also produced 3 singles, none of which were huge hits. The least successful of the 3, a little tune called Plastic Love. But fast forward more than 3 decades, and Plastic Love somehow became every gaijin's first city pop song thanks to an 8-minute remix uploaded by a channel called Plastic Lover on YouTube. The algorithm worked its magic, people clicked, people vibed, and the rest, as they say, is history. The upload reached over 55 million views before it was taken down, sparking a full-blown city pop renaissance that still hasn't completely died down. What made Plastic Love so special was that sweet yet melancholic melody, paired with this incredible photo of Takeuchi, which, fun fact, was actually taken by Adam Levinson for her 1980 single Sweetest Music. Totally unrelated to Plastic Love, but the vibes, immaculate. The nostalgia, off the charts. And so, Plastic Love became lightning in a bottle, a song that finally got the recognition it deserved decades later, while also propelling a slew of other great 80s city pop tunes to international success, in what has to be one of the most unique success stories in music history. God bless the YouTube algorithm. Exactly a month later, on May 25th, Japan decided to make video games way less convenient when the government amended its copyright law with a new clause called the right of lending, giving copyright owners full control over how their work could be distributed. Translation: video game rentals were now basically illegal in Japan. At the time, Japan's rental industry was of course booming. Movie and music rentals, those got to survive with hefty licensing fees and time delays on new releases. But the gaming industry wasn't having it, and companies like Nintendo actually pushed hard to ban rentals in the US too, without much success. But at least in Japan, renting video games was now basically a thing of the past, unless the copyright holder specifically allowed it. So yeah, back to paying full price for your cartridges. Turns out, not everything was better in 1980s Japan. But hey, at least you could look good while buying your games full price. Because on June 2nd, a small store called Unique Clothing Warehouse opened in Hiroshima with one goal: affordable, self-service fashion for everyone. The store was new, but the company behind it wasn't. It started as the men's clothing division of Ogori Shoji, founded in 1949. That 1984 Unique Clothing Warehouse, that was the company's first foray into unisex clothing, and it paid off. Big time. Later that year, Yanai Tadashi, the founder's son, became president and pushed for expansion. New stores followed, revenue exploded, and Unique Clothing Warehouse became Uniqlo. By the early 1990s, when Japan's economy was in freefall, Uniqlo thrived, offering quality clothes at prices that people could actually still afford. Fast forward to today, over 2,500 stores worldwide, billions in revenue, and Yanai Tadashi as Japan's richest man, worth over $50 billion. His true ambition? Complete global saturation. Or at least for Uniqlo to become the largest retailer in the world. Which isn't that much different, I guess. But clothes can only do so much for you. After all, what's the point of fashion when you got an empty stomach? For Japan, there's no better solution for that problem than good old sushi. And starting in 1984, that beloved dish of the Japanese was about to spread much farther and much faster than ever before. On June 6th, Japan's dining scene leveled up when the first Sushiro restaurant opened in Toyonaka, Osaka Prefecture. Specializing in kaiten, or conveyor belt sushi, Sushiro nailed the formula of cheap, fast, and delicious like no one else. Their early branding, however, complete mess, if we're being completely honest. That first branch, actually called Sushitaro, later renamed Sushiro to avoid a lawsuit, but only in certain regions. For a while, you had Sushiro in Hyogo, Sushitaro north of Osaka, and Akindo south of Osaka. All run by the same two brothers, serving the same sushi the exact same way, just under completely different names. It wasn't until 2009 that they finally unified under the name Sushiro. Took you long enough. Did the customers care though? Pfft, not one bit. Japan lined up anyway, and today, with over 600 locations and more than 150 million customers annually in Japan alone, Sushiro serves over 1 billion plates of sushi every single year. That's a whole lot of carbs and protein, my friends. Then on July 25th, Japan officially ended its Repatriation Program to North Korea, a policy that, believe it or not, once sent actual volunteers there. And yes, we are talking about North Korea here. Between 1959 and 1984, the program relocated about 93,000 from Japan to North Korea. Most of them ethnic Koreans, and ironically, an estimated 97% of them originally from the southern half of the Korean peninsula. In the early days of the repatriation program especially, North Korea looked like a land of opportunity. But of course, that optimism turned into tragedy for many who left, and returning to Japan, not really an option. And not just because of the political situation between the two nations. And speaking of political situations, on September 19th, the headquarters of Japan's ruling Liberal Democratic Party, or LDP, went up in flames after a shocking arson attack. Around 7:35 p.m., 2 trucks disguised as delivery vehicles pulled into the parking lot of a Chinese restaurant behind the LDP building in Tokyo's Chiyoda ward. As one driver distracted a clerk with a fake parcel, several men jumped out, pulled out a freaking flamethrower, and then blasted the building. The fire tore through the 3rd to 7th floors, burning about 520 square meters. The good news, no casualties whatsoever to speak of. And less than 2 hours later, someone had already claimed responsibility for the crime too. The Chukakuha, a communist extremist group opposing the expansion of Narita Airport. I mean, a flamethrower in a parking lot of a Chinese restaurant in the middle of Tokyo? Now that is one hell of a statement, alright?
コマーシャルタイムです。
あ、いらっしゃいませ。ご近所ならではのお付き合い、ちょっとお気軽にお立ち寄りください。お待ちしてます。ナショナルのお店。
神か悪魔か、地獄に現れた最強の男。かつてない壮大なスケールで描くニュー格闘技アニメ「北斗の拳」第1話。いよいよ10月4日夜7時、衝撃のスタート。お前はもう死んでいる。
Next up, October 24th, and the release of an album which shows us that hey, Japanese music in the 80s wasn't just cutesy idol pop. Enter Sakamoto Ryūichi, musical visionary, genre blender, snappy dresser, and all-around genius. Few artists have managed to shape modern music the way that he has, and his 4th solo album Ongaku Sukan, or Music Encyclopedia, is an interesting part of his discography for a few reasons. It was his first solo project in 3 years, and instead of approaching it with a clear plan or theme, Sakamoto just went into the studio and created. He experimented, improvised, and let Tokyo itself, buzzing with mid-80s tech and energy, guide his process. A process that was also captured brilliantly in Elizabeth Leonard's documentary Tokyo Melody, which shows Sakamoto just tinkering away in the studio.
じゃあ簡単に。
こういうある時間ね、これをね、ループにしてんのこの辺を。
新しい音を作れるわけでしょ。どんどん。
もちろん作れる。
The end result, a kaleidoscope of sounds and genres that feels impossible to categorize, and impossible to forget. Over the decades that followed, Sakamoto became known best mainly for his incredible film scores, which ended up earning him an Academy Award, a Grammy, and 2 Golden Globes. Now, he may not have been a household name to everyone, but in Japan's musical history, Ryuichi Sakamoto stands as one of its brightest, boldest innovators. And dare I say it, perhaps the most effortlessly stylish dude that Japan in the 1980s had to offer.
もしもし。フィッシュはね、音楽が好きなのと同じぐらい絵が好きだって言ったんだよ。じゃあまたね。
Remember how the compact disc debuted in Japan in 1982? Well, only 2 years later, Sony managed to make it portable. In November of 1984, they dropped the D-50, the world's first portable CD player. Kind of. Engineers were told to make it smaller than 4 stacked jewel cases. And at that, they certainly succeeded. However, you couldn't even use the thing without a power outlet, unless you carried around one of these humongous battery pack accessories. When you use this thing on the subway, better throw it in a backpack. Still, for its time, this thing was absolutely revolutionary. Compared to the CDP-101 from 1982, the first CD player ever, period, the D-50 looked like alien technology or something. And at roughly half the price of other home CD players at the time, it was also one of the first players to finally make the CD format as a whole somewhat affordable for average consumers. And so, it became a hit. And its successor, the D-50 Mark II, would officially kick off one of Sony's most iconic product lines ever. The Discman. Ready for some gossip? Because November 9th, 1984 marks the birth of one of Japan's most infamous gossip racks, Friday Magazine. Published by Kodansha and released every, Friday, it quickly became Japan's go-to source for celebrity scandals and privacy violations. Getting caught by Friday was such a big deal that people literally started saying they'd been Fridayed. And oftentimes, the magazine did perhaps a little bit too much Fridaying. In 1986, after a Friday reporter harassed a woman who was in an intimate relationship with Kitano Takeshi, the actor and comedian assembled 11 of his disciples, stormed the editorial office, and roughed up the staff a bit. Oh, and those Matsuda Seiko and Kondo Masahiko dating rumors that I mentioned back in the 1982 episode? Yep, that was Friday too. How dare they? Still, despite the tabloid chaos, Friday's cultural influence is unfortunately undeniable. At its peak, it sold an astonishing 2 million copies per issue, and with over 2,000 issues published since its inception, it's still alive today, in an era where print media is more or less on life support. That's fine and all, just make sure to keep Seiko-chan out of it next time. November 20th, 1984. A date that you might not recognize, but one that went on to shape the childhoods of millions across the globe, and maybe even yours. In that week's issue of Shueisha's weekly shonen jump, Akira Toriyama's Dragon Ball debuted its first chapter. 40 years later, there's really nothing that I can say about the story of Son Goku and Co. that hasn't been said at least a million times over, so allow me to keep it short. It became a global phenomenon, a cornerstone of manga, anime, and entertainment as a whole that inspired countless kids and adults alike. And with over 260 million copies sold worldwide, it is still the best-selling manga series in history. But this right here, this is where it all started. One small chapter in November of 1984 that grew into one of Japan's greatest ever cultural exports. How about we close out 1984 with something both dirty and clean? On December 19th, Japan's favorite type of adult establishment got a nice little rebrand. For decades, Japanese men had frequented so-called Turkish baths or torko, for reasons that had little to do with bathing, if you catch my drift. But then, in November of 1984, one Turkish exchange student in Japan had had enough. Offended by the misuse of his country's name, he wrote to the Yomiuri Shimbun newspaper, they had a solution. They launched a nationwide naming contest on November 16th, looking for an alternative name for the Toriko. Over 2,000 suggestions poured in, and by December 19th, the new name was official. Soapland, or Soapland. The term caught on instantly and remains a fixture in Japan's red light districts even to this day. December 19th, 1984, the day when the dirtiest baths in Japan got a squeaky clean new name. And that, my friends, is another year done. Next up, the halfway mark of the 1980s. Boy, do I not want this decade to come to an end. The music, the tech, the chaos, I'm having way too much fun digging through this stuff. But before we exit our time machine for today, let me just give the usual shout out to my MVPs, my Patreon supporters who helped make all of this possible in the first place, including D-Fox, The Hockey Gentleman, Khalid Lepta, Xo Iabu, Sai Kajo, Javier Soravia, Steve Matsui, Turam, RK0, Todd, Hajime no James, Utku Hussein Kaya, Hypanen, Torian Gales, Sierra DC, White Gilden, Justin Down, Yoko the Space Whale, Cats and Soup, Jart B-Man, Ben Herodine, Metal Mama, T-Bird, Tom Ericus Prime, Boo Boo Cakes, JR Horse, Ian Farmer, Tricoat, and Adae Akono. To all of you and everyone else who, for some reason, watches these until the very end, I guess I will see you next year. じゃあ、またね。